Chapter 2. Now I'm back talking about this little side thing. I've been talking about this a lot. This book that I'm writing on with Ailani about Zombie Guide to Finance. Now, budgeting basics for limited resources. This is our chapter 2. Limited resources in the zombie apocalypse. Now, let's set the stage here and imagine we're back in the world where Ailani is at in the middle of the zombie apocalypse. Now, Ailani has gotten separated from her parents, and she's sitting in her little tent. She's scared, she's freaked out, but she got some food. She was able to find some food and water, and the food and water that she has is not a lot. She's got a couple eggs. She found some canned food, and she found a few bottles of water, and she's not guaranteed of finding anything else. So Ailani sits down and looks inside her bag and pulls out a piece of paper. Okay. Now, she remembers that her daddy taught her when she was younger the idea of budgeting. He would always talk about budgeting money. And one of the things that Ailani's daddy, me, taught her was that she needs to write down all of the money she has. So Ailani starts out by writing down on the piece of paper, eggs, 3. Canned beans, 2. Canned vegetables, 1. Bottles of water, 3. Now, why is Ailani doing this? Well, because she remembers that by writing this all down, she can know what she has, so that when she starts using it, she has a good track of what she's using up and what's still left over. Now, budgeting is a survival tool. Now, it's a survival tool in the zombie world, but even more so, it's a survival tool in our world. The idea of being able to write things down and keep track of them is super, super important, because budgeting allows you to do a couple things. One, it allows you to know where you're at, which is extremely important. It allows you to know what resources you have at this moment, and then to make intelligent decisions. That data that you are putting down on that paper can inform you of, should I eat more today? Should I eat less today? Should I be careful with the water that I'm drinking? Or do I have enough so that it's okay for me to have an extra sip today? Now, unless you know where you're at and you're tracking that, you'll have no idea of what you should be doing. Ailani is still in this story, and she is dealing with a couple things. She only has a few cans of food, small amount of water. And the reality is, in this zombie apocalypse world, there's no guarantee of finding any more food soon. Ailani's thought process is, how many more days does she need her resources to last? How long can she stretch out those couple eggs and those cans of beans? How much can she eat every day to be okay? And how many more eggs does she need to go out and find so that she can keep up her current lifestyle? Or does she need to cut back? Or what else might she need to be doing? Now, the tense moment that she might have is that she feels really hungry, and she's going to want to eat all of that food. And I'm sure you've all seen a comedy movie where the main character has saved all this food, and they turn around and the comedic character has suddenly eaten all of it. We see it in a lot of movies, but the reality is that is a danger that people might have in that zombie apocalypse world. People might have the temptation to go and eat that extra food. So Ailani's sitting there and she's really hungry, and she has that temptation to go and eat that extra food. But because she's written down on her budget how much she has, and because she's planning on not being able to find food for a couple days, she knows that she shouldn't. Now, this is why budgeting is key, because budgeting is the process of allocating our resources carefully to make them last. And for adults, budgeting means that you need to make your resources last not just a day, a week, but your entire life. We think about being able to go to work and be able to go to work forever. But you know what? Certain people aren't able to go to work forever. You think about professional athletes or movie stars whose careers are much shorter than many people, Granted, we all know of the Brad Pitts and the Angelina Jolies, who are, these actors that have been able to have this longevity in their careers, which is awesome. But for every actor who has extreme longevity, there are people who have one hit or two hits, and then their career is done. And they still also have to figure out how to make that money last. Sports athletes are the same. Now, in the real world, we don't think about the dangers of getting eaten tomorrow. But there are dangers out there for us as well. Maybe you get hurt. Maybe you hurt your arm, and you're not able to go to work and do the same job you did. I had a friend who was a teacher, and then he suffered a stroke. And he wasn't able to continue working in the same capacity that he was. And those things can happen to people. Now, there's some things that are really important to do. Number one, you must identify your total resources. Now, in the zombie world, that's what things you have. Maybe it's your axe. Maybe it's your tent. Maybe it's your sleeping bag. And maybe that's your food and other things that have value for you. Maybe you find some extra things that maybe you can trade down the road. Well, you need to know all of the different resources you have so you know what you're working with. The most important thing too in the zombie world and the real world is to prioritize your essentials first. What are the things that are your real needs? Now, in our world, that's going to be the things that you need to do to stay fed, to keep a roof over your head. You have to pay your rent. You have to pay heating. You have to pay water. You have to pay for food. These are your essentials. And literally, those are the things that all of us should be focusing on first. Once we're able to meet those needs, then you can start looking for other things. But unless you're at that bottom level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and your survival needs are being met, it's going to be really hard to build upward. And if you make a bad decision and you say, hey, I don't have enough money for my rent, but I'm going to go out and buy this new giant beanbag chair, it's not going to go so well when rent is due and suddenly you only have a beanbag chair and you're out on the street. Now, the zombie world, the same thing is happening. You got to focus on your essentials first. Now, what next? Well, you got to create a plan and stick to it. If you know that you're only able to find about 3 eggs a week, well, you should be really careful to not eat more than those 3 eggs. Because if you eat more than those 3 eggs, you eat 3 eggs in one day, well, you might go hungry for the rest of the week. And this is kind of the same mentality that people that are paycheck to paycheck have. And I pointed some fingers at myself here. And I've done this many times where I didn't create a plan and stick with it. And when we do that, we're setting ourselves up, maybe not for failure, but for stress, for difficulties, and for some moments that are going to be a little bit more challenging than we might like. Now, how does this affect the real world? Well, let's draw some comparisons. In real life application, it's financial budgeting. It might not be going and trying to be in survival mode, though some people might be there. But resources could be our income. Our essentials in the zombie world would be things like our needs, our rent, our food, and our utilities. Non-essentials in the zombie world would be things like our wants, entertainment and luxuries, video games and things like that. Now, for myself, I remember some really difficult days in the past. I remember a day when I was living in Los Angeles in graduate school where I didn't have enough money. I had not budgeted correctly, and I was waiting for my next paycheck, and it was 3 days away. And I was out of money. Out. I had $3 left. It was a couple of years ago, so I was able to go and buy a hamburger. And I got home, and my dog looked at me in a very hungry way. And what did I do? I fed my dog. I took a couple pieces of breadcrumbs, and I said, well, tonight, I'm going hungry. And it was a horrible experience. Luckily, the next day, my paycheck came through, and I was able to go and buy some groceries. But forever afterwards, what stuck with me was the memory of that. the memory of not having food. And it reminded me of being in the zombie apocalypse, where I was sitting there going, well, I don't have any food tonight. What do I need to do to survive? Now, wherever you might be, we can start changing this financial situation. We can start preparing for the future and preparing to not have those moments. Doesn't mean it's always going to be easy. If you're living in the zombie apocalypse, sometimes you got to fight some zombies. And sometimes you're going to be a little bit hungry. But if you make the right decisions, there will be the ability for you to grow those eggs, to grow that wealth. Now let's look for a bit of a challenge. I want you to create your ration plan, aka your budget. Now, set up the challenge for yourself or for your children that you're working with, because hopefully a lot of parents are reading this with their kids. Now, imagine that you're in Ailani's situation with limited food and water. How are you going to divide your resources to last a total of 7 days? All right. So say you're planning the envelope method. Some people really love this, where they set aside envelopes for a certain amount of money for a period of time. Now, you need to include considerations like the following. Are there going to be any emergencies or unexpected setbacks that you might need to prepare for? But first of all, when you create your ration plan, you need to make a list of what resources you have. And again, we need to make those last for at least the next 7 days. Maybe you need to make those resources last for 2 weeks or a month. But if you can start putting together your ration plan and start putting down on paper what it is that you need to make last, then you're going to be better prepared. Now, Ailani's back in her tent. She looks at her ration plan and she sees, all right, she's got to last a week. She's got to get through the next week with the resources she has. So Ailani has made a decision. Time to overcome the temptation. She overcomes her hunger and temptation to eat more than planned. She decides, this is what I've got, and this is what I can eat. And she's going to save a little bit in case of emergencies. Maybe she gets hurt. Maybe there's a horde of zombies walking by outside, and she's not able to go look for food when she thought she was going to be able to. So she's prepared a little bit extra to survive. Now, what does she need to do that? Well, there's some things that are going to be really important. Focus, discipline, and determination to stick to the ration plan are literally the most important things. And one of the next most important things is that when Ailani gets through that week, she has to celebrate that win. She has to pat herself on the back and say, I just achieved a huge thing by growing my resources, by not running out and not starving. That's a win. To survive for one more week in the zombie world is something that we have to celebrate. And Ailani, I promise you, is going to celebrate her win. Now, what are some of the key takeaways that we can get from this story? Budgeting isn't just about money. It's a mindset that applies to time, energy, and other resources. We all have a limited amount of time. We all have a limited amount of energy. You can't be wasting it on everything. Now, planning ahead and sticking to a plan can make the difference between thriving and struggling. And that's what we want to focus on, how to thrive in life and not be stuck struggling forever. Now, there's something that we have to acknowledge here. Budgeting requires sacrifices, but the rewards are worth it. We're going to be talking in future chapters about how to take one egg and grow it into a chicken farm. But for right now, you have to recognize that if you want to turn that egg into a chicken, you can't eat all your eggs. You have to be saving some. How can you better prepare for your own budget? And one of the most important things is when you want to start budgeting, you have to provide a list of your resources. How much you're making, how much income you have, and what you're working with. And once you have that, you have to create a plan. What is your allowed amount that you're going to spend this week? And can you hit that? Are you setting aside some money for your needs, some money for your wants, and some money for savings? It's really important to have all three of those categories being met: your needs, your wants, and your savings. Some of that savings needs to be there in case of emergencies. And one of the other things that you can think of is, how will you handle an emergency? If you get injured, or if there's a zombie horde, what are you going to do in case of that situation? What will you do if you can't find more resources? These are all things that you can start thinking about. But again, the most important thing is knowing what resources you have to begin with. Now, you really have to start thinking critically and reflecting on your choices. Maybe there's something that you're spending money on that is really draining your resources, and that doesn't need to be there. Now, when we start tracking our budget, we can see maybe every night I get a little hungry and I start eating a little bit extra food. Well, in the zombie world, that's going to be a big problem. And in our world, that might be, maybe you've got that restaurant that you go out to eat to too often. Well, it doesn't mean that you have to stop it, but you have to start looking at, is that where you want to be putting all your money? And if it is, great. Then find other ways to save money. But if it's not, then you can make choices according to that decision. Now, again, we have to start applying this budgeting to our real life. More often, people create a budget for a month. Some people focus on 2 weeks. Now, again, you have to identify that split, your needs, your wants, and your savings goals. And you have to be planning for all of them. And if you can plan for emergencies as well, and you can emphasize that the value of building your own financial discipline in the process, then you're going to be on the right track. Remember this, budgeting is all about survival. If you don't budget correctly, you're going to be on track to not be getting ahead financially. So, budget to survive. Beyond that, start budgeting to thrive. You start off with survival. It starts off by keeping you from starving. But just like Ailani in the zombie world, your budgeting keeps her alive, but step by step, it can help her to thrive as well. I want to motivate you this week to remember that every small step in managing your resources brings you closer to your goals. But it all starts with right here and right now. Now, next week, Ailani is going to be facing a new challenge, one that requires some teamwork and a little bit of collaboration. Hope you guys are feeling inspired this week to face your own zombie threats, and I'll see you next time. All right, take care and have a great week.